Alright, so I just wanted to give you all a guided reading of Maya Angelou's New Directions. I went ahead and highlighted through the text some important details we'll need to pay attention to, so everyone just read and follow along. In 1903, the late Mrs. Annie Johnson of Arkansas found herself with 2 toddling sons, very little money, a slight ability to read and add simple numbers. To this picture add the disastrous marriage and the burdensome fact that Mrs. Johnson was a Negro. Alright, with the first paragraph, it sets up the story and tells us Mrs. Johnson's situation. We know it's set in 1903, so just think about how different those times were. Her financial situation, her marital situation, and as well as her social situation as a Negro. So just think about how her circumstances might be described in the first paragraph. When she told her husband, Mr. William Johnson, of her dissatisfaction with their marriage, he conceded that he too found it to be less than he expected and had been secretly hoping to leave and study religion. He added that he thought God was calling him not only to preach, but to do so in Enid, Oklahoma. He did not tell her that he knew a minister in Enid with whom he could study and who had a friendly, unmarried daughter. They parted amicably, Annie keeping the one-room house and William taking most of the cash to carry himself to Oklahoma. So look at what I have highlighted here. Secretly hoping to leave and study religion and friendly, unmarried daughter. Now, this kind of sounds a little bit like irony, considering that he's going to study religion, but as we know, it's not really religious to leave your wife for another woman. So just a little bit of irony there, and kind of describes Mr. Johnson's character. He might not be as true as he seems. Also, here are some vocabulary words from the text. Conceded just means to agree and admitted to, and amicably just means friendly. Annie, over 6 feet tall, big boned, decided that she would not go to work as a domestic and leave her precious babies to anyone else's care. There was no possibility of being hired at the town's cotton gin or lumber mill, but maybe there was a way to make the 2 factories work for her. In her words, I looked up the road I was going and back the way I come, and since I wasn't satisfied, I decided to take a step off the road and cut me a new path. She told herself that she wasn't a fancy cook, but that she could mix groceries well enough to scare hungry away and keep from a starving man. Okay, so let's look at this last paragraph. Just kind of focus on precious babes and think why Angelou would put those in quotation marks, what that kind of refers to, as well as the phrase, I looked up the road I was going and back the way I come, and since I wasn't satisfied, I decided to step off the road and cut me a new path. So let's think about how this applies to a theme that we might see in the text about making our own decisions for ourselves. And scare hungry away, just wanted to point out a form of figurative language here. She made her plans meticulously and in secret. One early evening, to see if she was ready, she placed stones in 2 5-gallon pails and carried them 3 miles to the cotton gin. She rested a little, and then discarding some rocks, she walked through the darkness to the sawmill 5 miles farther along the dirt road. On her way back to her little house and her babies, she dumped the remaining rocks along the path. And meticulously is another vocab word which just means thoughtfully. And precisely is another word we could use there. That same night she worked into the early hours boiling chicken and frying ham. She made dough and filled the rolled out pastry with meat. At last she went to sleep. The next morning she left her house carrying the meat pies, lard, an iron brazier, and coals for a fire. Just before lunch she appeared in an empty lot behind the cotton gin. As the dinner noon bell rang, she dropped the savors into boiling fat, and the aroma rose and floated over to the workers, who spilled out of the gin, covered with light lint, looking like specters. Here, brazier just means a small grill, so just kind of picture that. Aroma rose and floated over, looking like specters. Those are just some examples of figurative language. Most workers have brought their lunches of pinto beans and biscuits or crackers, onions and cans of sardines, but they were tempted by the hot meat pies, which Annie ladled out of the fat. She wrapped them in newspapers, which soaked up the grease, and offered them for sale at a nickel each. Although business was slow, those first days Annie was determined. She balanced her appearances between the 2 hours of activity. So, on Monday, if she offered hot fresh pies at the cotton gin and sold the remaining cool-down pies at the lumber mill for 3 cents, then on Tuesday she went first to the lumber mill presenting fresh, just-cooked pies as the lumbermen covered in sawdust emerged from the mill. For the next few years, on balmy spring days, blistering summer noons, and cold, wet, and wintry middays, Annie never disappointed her customers, who could count on seeing her tall, brown-skinned woman bent over her brazier, carefully turning the meat pies. When she felt certain that the workers had become dependent on her, she built a stall between the 2 hives of industry and let the men run to her for their lunchtime provisions. Right, and balmy just means soothing, mild, or pleasant, and blistering is a descriptive word. She had indeed stepped from the road which seemed to have been chosen for her and cut herself a brand new path. In years the stall became a store where customers could buy cheese, meal, syrup, cookies, candy, writing tablets, pickles, canned goods, fresh fruit, soft drinks, coal, oil, and leather soles for worn-out shoes. Each of us has the right and responsibility to assess the roads which lie ahead and those over which we have traveled, and if the future road looms ominous or unpromising, and the roads back uninviting, then we need to gather our resolve and, carrying only the necessary baggage, step off that road into another direction. If the new choice is also unpalatable, without embarrassment, we must be ready to change that as well. So these highlighted sections here just define the theme of the text, which is we make our own decisions. So even though we are put in circumstances that seem not that good or unfavorable, we can make our own decisions and choices to form a new path for our lives. So even though Maya Angelou tells a narrative story about Mrs. Annie Johnson and how she began making pies for mill workers, it also looks at a certain theme about choices.